Good morning. Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for your letters. We appreciate receiving them. And please send us questions that you would like us to review. Today, our speaker is one of our former interns, Rossello, Alex Rossello, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Yale. He graduated from the Imperial College of London with a MEng engineering degree in Aeronautical Engineering in 2019 and joined EUMETSAT as Spacecraft Controller for the Sentinel-3 mission. During his time at Spacecraft Controller, Alex executed operations to monitor the advance of Hurricane Dorian, the California wildfires, and the eruption of the Mount Etna. As a former WIT intern, Alex is really passionate about the technological benefits space research can provide to emerging economies. At Yale, Alex is currently exploring the mechanics of tumor progression, how the human body mechanical environment relates to chemical resistance, and how evolution can describe it. He is part of Yale's Advanced Graduate Leadership Program and is really enthusiastic about technology transfer and the interaction between engineering and social entrepreneurship. Over to you, Alex.
Dr. Dobak, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And we're going to be talking about space research, space exploration, and how does this support and serve the Sustainable Development Goals. So I thought the first thing is have a look at some of the images that we've all probably seen at some point this year or past year. Some of these images were captured using low Earth orbit satellites, other were geostationary satellites. But let's have a look. So starting on the top left, we have an image of some of the Russian deployments, military deployments during military exercises in eastern Ukraine that the international community was monitoring really closely, and among other resources, we're using satellite images. Following on the right, that one is from earlier this year, the Suez Canal issue, and the maritime industry and shipping companies at some point started reassessing whether it was better to send the ships to wait there until the canal was unblocked, or just reroute them around the whole African continent. And you can see every one of the black spots is a ship. So the queue was quite long then. Following on the right, there is a pipeline in Siberia, and using remote sensing, leakages of natural gas along the pipeline can be identified. The next one on the right, that is from New Orleans earlier this year. With a couple of months ago, it was harshly hit by a hurricane. And in the early hours of the aftermath, satellite images can provide these early information to assess and to coordinate rescue missions. The next one on the bottom left, that is from the Californian wildfires. Similarly, satellite images can provide this information critical to assessing how the wildfires evolve, where they're going to travel, and to then inform some of the firefighter efforts in anticipation of what of how the fires will behave or evolve. The tiny image in the center, that is an oil spillage in Mauritius. Similarly, we need this bigger picture to assess how the contamination will travel and if it is to be contained, where the efforts need to be placed. The next one is from the Amazon wildfires. It's a signature of carbon monoxide released during the fires. Then there's a deforestation in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The next one is from La Palma, the Canary Island. Some weeks ago, one of the volcanoes erupted there, And using satellite images, it can be assessed how the lava will travel towards the ocean. And lastly, the image at the bottom is a comparison between the summer, the Antarctic summer and the Antarctic winter, and how the ice coverage changes. And so we've been using satellite images, we've been building a huge historical data set, and that we can use now to assess trends and compare data from the 80s to current data. And this is critical in the assessment of climate change. So this is what some of the images that are captured using orbital platforms. But yet there's still some criticism in, well, is money spent in space and space exploration properly used? So transparency is one of the cornerstones of modern democracies. So it's no surprise that the public expenditures are consistently judged and examined. And many political debates are fueled by differences in budget, budgetary priorities, and how efficiently those budgets should be put to use. But yet, in the age of misinformation, these good intentions and honorable principles are corrupted and distorted by statistics and narratives. And NASA is not exempt. In 2007, a survey found that the respondents estimated that NASA's budget was 24% of the national budget, whereas in reality, NASA's allocation in 2007 was of the order of 0.58% of the national budget. So this is an absolutely disproportionate overestimation. And even during the surveyed days of the space race, NASA's budget was only 4.4% of the federal budget. So public opinion seemed to be quite out of touch with the reality. And now in the fiscal year 2020, NASA captured only 0.48% of the federal budget, which it translates into $22.6 billion, which is still a generous amount of money and is understandably subject to public scrutiny. But to put it into perspective, in the same fiscal year, expenditure in defense accounted for $714 billion, whereas social security programs captured 1.1 trillion of the federal budget. We're talking of orders of magnitude greater in defense and another order of magnitude greater in social security. So these are huge numbers, and the majority of citizens don't really have a baseline to compare these figures. And this can result in kind of a distorted perception. And so how does this NASA's 22.6 billion budget relate to other sectors? So it is less than 20% of the tobacco industry revenue. So in fiscal year 2016, American consumers spent 117 billion in tobacco products. And NASA is still 22.6 billion. How does it compare to the gambling industry? Well, in 2019, consumers reached 43.6 billion. And in 2021, it is expected that this figure will grow to $44 billion. So still, NASA, in comparison with these two other sectors, it is dwarfed by these figures. So still, encouraged by these democratic principles of transparency and accountability, citizens want to know how the tax dollars are put to use. Some of these, well, some quotes illustrate noble intentions and compassionate hearts. So there's a quote saying that NASA should not be a priority when issues such as poverty, food insecurity, and homelessness exist in America. And they just demonstrate, again, noble intentions and compassionate hearts. There are other more simplistic slogans saying our tax dollars should be spent on us. And there are versions that hint a bit of resentment. A space shouldn't be treated like a personal playground for the ultra-rich. So we should certainly take responsibility for understanding how these tax dollars are actually being spent. So NASA is not a pit fire for tax dollars. in its 2020 economic impact study, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration actually reported a positive economic output of 64.3 billion. This is a stellar return for is a 280 something % return on a 22.6 billion budget. But still, justifying spending these billions based solely on economic returns and comparisons to third industries like gambling, defense, or tobacco, these comparisons might seem disconnected from the suffering of millions of people. So there's this brilliant story from the 70s that illustrates that quite well. So in the 70s, shortly after the first Apollo landing, a nun working in Zambia, Sister Mary Jacunda, that you can see in Lego format on the right, she wrote to NASA. So she asked, well, how can NASA justify spending billions when children starve to death? And the letter somehow made it to the desk of one of the top rocket scientists, which is Ernst Stollinger. Again, Lego format here on the left. He responded to this letter eloquently and certainly very compassionately. So it is a very long letter, but some of the main points that Stollinger makes are that in the 70s, the average American taxpayer with $10,000 income per year was paying only $30 for space, 30 of those tax dollars for space. So still, why don't spend the money? Why not send this money to poor children? So then he proceeds, then he says, well, institutional cash transfers are not that straightforward. Each of the government departments and administrations, like Interior, Justice, Health, Education, they all prepare their yearly budgets according to their missions. And so the budget of NASA naturally only contains items that are related to aeronautics and space. If that budget was not approved by Congress, then the funds proposed for it would simply not be available for something else. They would not be available for something else. They would simply not be levied from the taxpayer. And so support for hungry children, or rather support in addition to what the US is already contributing, is a very worthy cause. And the US is already contributing in the form of foreign aid. But that can only, these budgets can only be obtained if the appropriate department submits a budget line for this purpose. So Mr. Stollinger then empathically favors that his annual taxes would be increased by a certain number of dollars for the purpose of feeding hungry children wherever they may be. He then insists that bringing such cash transfers program to life cannot merely be based on desisting from making plans for voyages to the moon or Mars. He says that the space program can make contributions to the relief and eventual solution of such grave problems as poverty and hunger on Earth. And basic to hunger is two main functions: is production of food and the distribution of food. And as an example, large areas of land could be utilized far better if efficient methods of water control or fertilizer use or weather forecasting, plantation programming, field selection, or many more were applied and widely available. And so for these, the best tool in these functions would be undoubtedly the Earth observation satellite. And regarding the distribution of food, well, that is a completely different problem, not so much about shipping volume, but more about international cooperation. But the requirements for this high precision and extreme reliability, which must be imposed on components that would go to the moon or on other spacecraft, these are unprecedented in the history of engineering. They were unprecedented back in the day, and they still unprecedented today for current missions. But all this newly acquired technical knowledge was made available for application to earthbound technologies, and in the future, in current missions, it will be made available for other earthbound technologies. And so, for example, these are some of the Spinos that we've most likely all seen. GPS. It's really hard to imagine a world without GPS. Stopping at a petrol station with a map asking for indications. That would feel really, really weird. So we have the GPS, which is based, which is supported by the GPS constellation. Europe is putting efforts towards the GNSS and the Galileo constellations. So navigation essential. We have the CMOS as a camera sensor in our phones nowadays. We probably carry at least 2 or 3 of those. We have the handheld vacuum cleaner, the infrared thermometer. Again, like in these days that we're living, how many times we've been stopped at an airport or entering a building and we've been taking the temperature using one of those. It would be really hard to imagine that you would have to raise an armpit and then put one of the old thermometers there. Baby formula is also one of the Spinos from the space race and space research, and it was so they when developing life support for Mars mission, some NASA funded researchers, they discovered that a natural source of omega-3 fatty acids that is only present in breast milk, and it plays a key role in infant development. Cordless tools, also a Spino from space research. The filters for this Brita filter, some of the working principle behind some of these filters is a Spino from NASA's water filtering or liquid filtering system. As you know, there's an International Space Station orbiting Earth at around 400 kilometers altitude. They don't have tap water. They need to recycle the water. And so it is in their best interest that the water is properly purified before consumption. The cochlear implants are also a spin of NASA, and some of the materials that are used to manufacture the equipment that firefighters use, the fire retardant or fire resistant equipment, clothes. It's also a spin-off from the space suits. And I guess like a special mention for the handheld vacuum cleaner that was originally designed and developed to collect dust samples from the moon. And within 5 years, it was featured in a TV commercial used by a housewife. And I thought it was quite a revealing anthropological twist of the 70s. But yeah, so NASA has this website called Home and City, where you can go and explore the city or explore the home, and there's going to be some items that you can select, and it has a bit of information about what's the origin of these item, device, or contraption, and how is it related to space research. But how does all this support the Sustainable Development Goals? So there are two. The next bit of the presentation will be a kind of using these two main references. One is the European Global Navigation Satellite System of Copernicus. It's a report on supporting the Sustainable Development Goals with satellites, and then there's also a space for SDGs. And I invite the audience to visit these two websites and learn more about it. So yeah, the next video will be based on some of the findings in this report. So Sustainable Development Goal 1, no poverty. So space technologies are central, among other things, in forecasting some of the natural disasters and better coordinate subsequent aid provision, even more so in these times of climate change that we see harsh weather events or more dramatic weather events happening even more often. But space technologies are also central to optimizing the sustainable utilization of natural resources, providing efficient support to vulnerable populations, mapping populated areas and their access to basic services, So precision agriculture integrating the global navigation system and other observation data can achieve yield increases of over 10% for crops and reduce fuel, fertilizer, and pesticide inputs by up to 20%. So this contributes to alleviating poverty by ensuring the adequate and continued access to food and natural resources, while also reducing adverse environmental impacts. So very much related to the previous point with hunger, precision agriculture integrating these GNSS and other observation data can increase crop yields of up to 10% and reduce the fuel, fertilizer, and pesticide inputs. So crop productivity can be optimized through informed management and increased efficiency in the use of existing resources. And similarly, livestock management can also be improved through enhanced monitoring and identification of suitable grazing. And then for health and well-being, so space technology can be fundamental in a range of health applications. So using remote sensing, it is possible to identify the ecological and environmental factors that contribute to the spread of vector-borne diseases. We can monitor the disease patterns and define areas that require disease control and planning. So these are, for example, malaria, cholera, some of these diseases that which host vectors are very much conditioned by environmental factors. So satellite technologies can be used to monitor air quality and traffic with precision. It can only be done from orbit. Then orbital platforms can also support health and disease prevention through wearable monitoring devices. And in the future, we will also witness an expansion of remote healthcare enabled by orbital communication satellites. So overall, space technologies can contribute to the prevention of people falling below the poverty line and help target specific support to those in need. In education, our satellite systems will soon be able to provide high-speed internet connectivity to remote and isolated communities. So through e-learning, it will be possible to monitor the attendance and also engineer incentives to reduce dropout rates. Most importantly, it just makes this e-learning makes it possible. In gender equality, it is highly related to education, and as we said, satellites can support women's empowerment by supporting access to quality education in remote and isolated communities. Satellites can provide the soft access to training and the soft infrastructure and information. Plus, let's not ignore the growth of career development opportunities within STEM. And space, as a concept, is quite an inspirational factor. In water and sanitation, so Earth observation satellites can monitor the water quality and are essential for meteorological forecasting. Then, in addition to identifying optimal sites for the production of renewable energy, satellite data can also be used to forecast the production of solar and wind energy, and then estimate the amount of energy that will be needed from other resources to synchronize power grids. So essentially, it can be used to where the best spots to produce renewable energy, but also to coordinate with more traditional energy sources and the renewables. So census counts and demographic service are really costly and time-consuming and labor-intensive. But data from remote sensing platforms can be integrated, and estimates of GDP and population can be derived. Some of these there were some exercises carried in rural Africa in which, depending on if the roof of a house or of a hood is it's more shiny, the reflectance is higher, that indicates metal. If this is rougher, that can indicate mud or another material. And then they can build some correlations with the socioeconomic status and purchasing power. Other proxies could be how well lit a city or an area is at night. That has a bit of a correlation with GDP as well. So all these information, all these data points can be integrated, and it can be all put together to derive something as a GDP or population estimate. So yeah, in addition, then the space research and technologies, they can support sectors such as service, utilities, banking, finance, agriculture, communications. And in addition, it can also be implemented for lone workers monitoring and establish a safe and secure working environment for people that work alone. Then remote sensing is the most reliable technology to map and monitor large infrastructures. That can be road networks in rural environments, or pipelines, as we have explored in the second slide. Then it can also be used integrated in a smart mobility framework, and it could enable reduced fuel consumption and smarter planning and monitoring of driving behaviors. Then the orbital platforms can provide reliable access to information and guarantee connectivity in remote and isolated areas. This could potentially enable the remote participation in democratic processes. Then satellite images are absolutely central to urban planning. In addition to images, remote sensing can support the improvement of city services, such as smart waste management systems, but also to monitor the air quality and monitor big infrastructures. And so the combination of Earth observation, satellite telecommunications, and global navigation satellite systems, all that can assist the management of natural resources, enabling this precision farming that we've been talking about, that could achieve 10% higher crop yields. But also we could use remote sensing to trace food and goods. So space technologies play a central role in climate action, in climate monitoring. Remote sensing data is simply fundamental in monitoring climate change and forecasting weather. As we said before, we've built these historical data set that goes back to the 80s, and we have now almost 5 decades worth of climate, weather, satellite imagery, and satellite information in general that can be used to compare trends, to assess trends, and to understand better some of these very complex planetary behaviors. In terms of life below water, orbital systems are vital for navigation. They're used to track fishing vessels. They can be used to monitor illegal and unreported fisheries. And remote sensing can be used to assess marine and coastal resources, map and monitor protected areas, and track water temperature. So then moving to number 15, they're live on land. Similar to the one before, remote sensing satellites provide the observations needed for land surface monitoring, biodiversity monitoring, and can even help identify poaching areas and smuggling routes. In terms of peace, justice, and strong institutions, remote sensing satellites have been a pivotal tool in conflict monitoring. The information acquired from orbit has been essential in assessing damage, collecting evidence, but also planning both military and diplomatic strategies. So as we've mentioned, satellites have been, so can provide this access to reliable information and could in the future enable the participation of remote and isolated communities in democratic processes. And the Sustainable Development Goal 17, partnerships for the goals. So the robust international cooperation initiatives are central to space programs, from the International Space Station to the Copernicus network, shared infrastructure, exchange of technical know-how, exchange of data, and access to open source databases. All these are part of the benefits and needs of space exploration and technology development. So here's the Copernicus OpenHAB website. I invite the audience to visit and play around and design your own proxies and your own, you derive the data, playing around with it. And NASA similarly has NASA Worldview. You can access it, it's free, it's open. And again, just explore, play around, and maybe you can come up with a, you can compare historical data, or you can come up with a new proxy for a metric. But yeah, the last thing that I would like to cover is, like, in 2020, the Earth observation sector accounted for 55% of the global space expenditure. And these multilateral agreements and exponential increase in the number of players will certainly expand our scientific knowledge, push our technological progress, and in turn, it will bring remarkable and scientific benefits for the world. And with that, thank you so much. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Alex, very, very much for a very interesting perspective on space exploration, how it relates to sustainable development goals, and what is the possibility of future human development. I will now pass over to Jessica Williamson, our regional director, to ask all the questions that we have received. Jessica?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Durbach, and thank you, Mr. Rossello, for a very interesting discussion on the future of space exploration. Our first question is from one of our students, and she wants to know, what is more likely in the future, that our planet will be able to save its resources, or that we will have to look for resources from other planets? What do you think?
Alex, would you be so kind and remove your PowerPoint so that we can see your face?
Sure.
All right, that's much better.
So the question is whether we're gonna be relying on resources here on Earth, and we're gonna have to go find resources elsewhere. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I don't think these are exclusive. These are not mutually exclusive. We are still gonna have to develop technologies to extract resources from our planet, while still developing other technologies to probably go extract resources elsewhere. So there's the idea of asteroid mining. With some of these asteroids, their composition is sometimes mostly platinum, or sometimes some of precious metal. So it seems really attractive to go and get a chunk of asteroid and come back and make some jewelry. In terms of non-luxury goods, it's hard to tell. So if we're talking about farming, it seems quite unlikely that we're going to go to the moon to farm. However, some of the technologies that will be developed and some of the research that is currently being pursued to be able to farm in Mars or in the moon will certainly find an application here on Earth. So I'm not sure about extracting resources from elsewhere and bringing them back, but certainly the technologies that are being pushed to for those activities will find an application here.
Very interesting. So potentially not space farming just yet. We have a few other of our viewers who are curious who want to know about space tourism. And what is your attitude towards the development of space tourism, and could it harm space?
I mean, it is it is certainly a polarizing topic, to say the least. My approach, it is showing off. My approach towards it is that, so these companies that will provide these trips to space, their incentives, they are revenue oriented. Their incentives are getting revenue, selling tickets. However, in order to do that, they need to sell tickets at an relatively affordable price. So they are pushing the scientific envelope forward. And so even though we might, as normal people, might not go to space with one of those space tourism tickets, they push the science envelope. So, for example, I believe the space shuttle, during the space shuttle days, to put £1 in orbit, the cost was around $25,000. With starships and spacecraft, that figure goes back to 700. So instead of 25,000, we brought it down to 700. And the main incentive being, we want to bring people beyond the Kármán line, so that they can take a photo for Instagram and then come back. But still, we managed to develop the technology to the point where putting £1 in orbit is 700 versus the previous figure. And that technology now is available for other applications. So for example, for smaller satellites that will provide internet to more rural areas, now it is doable. And that will see interesting spin-offs.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. So you mentioned that space technologies can provide internet to more rural areas. We have a lot of people who are curious to know about free Wi-Fi in space. Will that ever be a possibility?
As in accessing while in space, or?
Accessing Wi-Fi while in space.
Well, yeah, the astronauts in the International Space Station, they have access to the internet, I believe. As you move away from Earth, then some of the constraints are just physical constraints, which is the speed of light. Communication with Mars, I believe, at the speed of light, it takes a order of 20 minutes. Is that correct? It's not instantaneous.
Could you repeat that? So, communication with Mars takes 20 minutes?
I believe at this, I'm not quite sure about that, but I believe at the speed of light, depending on the position of Mars relative to the orbit of the Earth, I believe that point that it takes about 20 minutes. So if you have to, so when you want to access a website and go on YouTube or check your email, and you go on the browser and access the URL, then you send a request to a server. So if you try to do that from Mars, that request here travels at the speed of light, so the distance is short, and that is fine. From Mars, that request won't be instantaneous. So I guess, yes, we do communicate with spacecraft and probes that are on the surface of Mars and orbiting Mars. That communication already exists. The working principles are the same, but accessing the servers where internet or the World Wide Web is stored, that's going to take a bit of time, I guess. Or we just have to replicate that there.
What do you think about Starlink satellite internet service from Space Exploration Technologies Corp? Do you know anything about that?
I think, yeah, Starlink, I believe they're trying to, I'm not sure, I think they have 380 something satellites already in orbit. They are in low Earth orbit, around 800 kilometers altitude. And essentially they cover most of the globe and around the equator, mostly away from the poles. And the idea is that they will be able to provide Wi-Fi, or rather than Wi-Fi, I would say internet access to some of these rural areas, which I think it's incredibly interesting because when we talk about the development goal about gender equality, as soon as you bring access to information and people or girls, young girls are able to attend school and spend more time learning in school, literacy rate will increase, and therefore you would only expect that the socioeconomic situation of those countries will only get better.
Thank you. Our next question is from Vadim. He asks, what are the ways to solve the problem of space debris, in your opinion? Because it's a very important problem.
It is an issue. Yeah, during my time as Spacecraft Controller, I had to deal with it many times. And that will only get worse. There are incentives and there are motivations to try to be better at it. So when injecting a spacecraft into an orbit, we try to generate as few debris as possible, as little debris as possible. But some of these are where they're back from some of the exploration in the 70s, from accidents that happened a couple of years ago. I remember China blasted one of its own satellites, and that added to the cloud of debris. There are international agencies that are tracking some of these pieces that can be as small as a centimeter. How are they going really, really fast? So it is an issue. Now, I'm not sure about removing, as in cleaning. I think most of the developments that we're going to see in the coming years are more on the side of tracking. If you know with certain precision where a bit of debris will be, then you can plan your orbit so that you avoid it. Also, most of our current satellites are sitting beyond the cloud of debris. So you just have to get through it, and then you park your satellite in the orbit.
Thank you. Our next question is from OHA. They want to know, are most governments interested in space research on a national level? Is it profitable for them?
So if I understand the question, so do governments want to, is it profitable for governments to spend? Yes, the figure that was presented before was that NASA gets or captures 22 billion in the federal budget, at least in 2020. And then the economic output of that money was on the order of 60 billion. So it is certainly profitable for governments to spend money there. Plus then some of the how to quantify benefits of precision farming, better tracking of fisheries, monitoring of urban development, navigation systems. All that is harder to quantify. But what is quantified at the moment is like NASA idea, 22 in 66 hours.
Thank you. Our next question, our student wants to know, how does space exploration affect life on Earth? Could it cause bigger problems with global warming?
Not sure I do understand the question. How does it affect us on Earth? So we covered some of the Spinos. And in terms of global warming, is the question about whether putting things in orbit adds to global warming, or rather, well, in terms of global warming, yes, rockets do use fuel. So there is some of these gases that are being added. Depends on the rocket. Some use alcohols, others use oxygen and hydrogen. So mixing oxygen and hydrogen, you get water. And most of these launches, then the only kind of secondary gas or product that could affect global warming would be nitrogen oxides that are a consequence of the very hard metal in contact with the air, which is mostly nitrogen, but that is tiny. So there's also development in making fuel better in terms of from an environmental perspective, mostly because testing new rockets also has a risk. So if you crash a rocket, you have to clean, and it's in the best interest of the company for that to be easier to clean. So the incentives are there.
What do you think? Our next question is from Dimitri. He wants to know, what do you think of Elon Musk's progress in space exploration?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Again, motivation might be revenue centric, but they push the science envelope and the engineering envelope. They're successful at bringing down costs. We took that figure from $25,000 per pound with the space shuttle to $700 with the Starship. So there's merit there. In terms of engineering, yeah, then in terms of human resources management, that's a different question. So the engineering merits are there.
Thank you. Our next question is from Julia. She wants to know, to what extent has the pandemic affected the achievement of UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, I'm going to try to answer this question from a spacecraft or Earth observation kind of angle. There was a very interesting story that I was reading. Togo was badly hit by the pandemic, just like the whole world. However, most of Togo's economy is informal, so cash on hand. So as you impose a lockdown and you send people home, that street vendor or that mechanic that has to close the carriage, those people lose their source of income, and they don't have enough savings to be locked down for long weeks. So there was a need to send cash transfers, and so the cash transfers needed to be deployed. But again, limited resources. Where do you send that money? So an NGO and a professor from Berkeley used satellite images to serve as a proxy of the socioeconomic status of certain regions within Togo. So for example, if from space you see a more reflective region, that might indicate a metal roof. If it is rough, that might indicate straw or moss. And so those, by integrating that and then adding another layer, for example, how a grid looks. So if it looks more like a grid, that might indicate better urban planning, which tends to be correlated with a better socioeconomic status, versus if it's more chaotic and roads don't quite follow good planning, that tends to indicate maybe a lower socioeconomic status. So by integrating all these different layers, then they were able to map the regions in Togo that would be that need the money, that mostly need the money, and then they were able to send cash transfers through telephones. So then combining that in synergy with telecommunications and phone technology, they're able to transfer money to people in those regions.
Amazing. Our next question from Julia is, it can be said that COVID-19 has pushed developed countries towards, can it be said that COVID-19 has pushed developing countries towards rapid digital transformation?
Sorry, I might have missed the question there, or?
Pardon?
Have I missed the question there? What's the question there?
Oh, the question is, could it be said that COVID-19 has pushed developing countries into rapid digital transformation?
Yeah, I think so. There was simply no alternative than get used to Zoom and get used to a digital kind of bringing the workspace into a digital ecosystem, which already was. There's some benefit in being in person, but there was no alternative but to go to a digital ecosystem.
Excellent.
Alex, excuse me. Basically, from my understanding, COVID has pushed the tremendous expansion of Zoom and other technologies which allow people to be able to communicate without personal meetings. So the answer to that question would be yes, significant improvement in communication via the internet instead of human meetings.
Yeah, certainly. And it has a healthcare perspective as well. So in these times, it might not be the best idea to go in person to a hospital. So you might want to receive so you might want to receive your healthcare through a digital vector. So remote healthcare is becoming more prevalent as well.
That's correct. Oh, excuse me, Jessica, continue on with the questions.
Yes. And before we get to the end of our program, we have a lot of questions coming in about space aliens. Is it feasible, in your opinion, that space aliens exist, and could they attack us?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking that the universe is infinite and it is expanding. Then if it's infinite by definition, it contains everything you can think of, right? So I guess the logic answer there is yes. There'll be a form of life somewhere. Might not have hands, might not be carbon-based. We don't know. Might not rely on water. We really don't know. I guess from a very logic point of view, the universe is infinite and therefore it can contain that reality.
Another question from our viewers is, could space aliens attack Earth? And is there a way to put a protective shield around the Earth?
Well, you know, I don't necessarily think why. So I don't see why space aliens would be as mean as we have been through history among ourselves, colonizing on each other, right? So in that sense, I don't see the motivation. But in terms of a shield protecting the Earth, well, we have a very nice magnetic field out that is already protecting us from probably the most dangerous thing that we have, which is the sun. And it's actually fairly interesting and kind of to kind of turn that question upside down. We have systems that monitor asteroids whose trajectory could intersect with the Earth, and we have systems in place to monitor them. And if at some point it was necessary, even maybe deploy some measures. That's still not too sure. So the guidance systems required to hit an object moving that fast would be. I'm not quite sure we have the technology yet, but I'm sure there would be other ways to deploy measures. But it's quite interesting because we do have monitoring systems keeping an eye on these asteroids that fly around us. But yet we still read in the news that, oh, an asteroid has hit Russia, or an asteroid has fallen somewhere. Like, oh, how have we missed it? What has happened? And so essentially, it's similar to when you look straight at the sun, that you don't see anything, you just dazzled. And similar with our systems that monitor this type of objects, we only see the dark side. Any monitoring system that points to the sun, that is a bright region. We really don't see anything there. So that's why we sometimes are scared and read the headlines, oh, there's this asteroid that will pass really, really close. And the following day, one was missed and enters the Russian space program. And it's because it's coming from the other side, the dark side. So I think there's going to be developments there in that we want to keep an eye around the Earth, not only the dark side.
Fascinating. Okay, we have one more question going back to the issue of space debris. Is there a way, one of our viewers wants to know, is what are the ways that we could solve the problem of space debris?
Well, if I knew the answer. There's a lot of research being done on that. As I say, at the moment, there's some research groups that are trying something that looks like a net, and they would just launch a net, and then the net would kind of fold on itself, and then they would bring it back. There are other approaches for bigger pieces that they have a harpoon that would just shoot at the piece and then kind of bring it back again. I'm not sure what the real solution will be here to clean. I know most or a lot of research nowadays is put on monitoring. So it's just something that will be there for quite a while. It's better to have with certainty an accurate tracking of where it will be, and then you just dodge it. So I guess most of the research and most of the money now is being spent on monitoring. And again, we want to know where these things are, because when you have one of your spacecraft in orbit and you have a collision trajectory, the debris will not move. You have to move. So essentially, you have to execute a maneuver. Now, executing a maneuver interrupts service, so you're not going to be capturing with your instrument. And on top of that, it's burning fuel, and you have limited fuel. You don't have a petrol station up there. So every time that you execute one of those maneuvers, you sacrifice some life in orbit. So we want to know where these things are with certainty.
Interesting. It all sounds like very important work. And one of our viewers want to know, is there anybody who finds your work not important? Do you have any barriers to advocating for the legitimacy of space research?
Well, I guess I've been lucky enough to interact with very rational people, so I have really not faced much resistance against some rational arguments. I guess I've been really lucky in that regard, but I'm sure if I look elsewhere, I might find a bit of resistance.
And what is your favorite part of your profession? What do you enjoy most about your profession?
So I am currently doing research in cancer mechanics, but I'm trying to introduce some concepts that are from my previous. I apologize. I try to bring some concepts from aerospace engineering into cancer research. So I kind of really like that interdependence on how we bridge different industries, how we bring different perspectives, and also how, as I said, just something like a space tourism, which sounds so showy, it is successfully bringing down costs. We will be able to put satellites in orbit that provide internet. People will be spending more time at school. Hopefully, we'll be spending more time at school. Fertility rates will decrease as literacy rates increase. I just love these trickle-down effects introduced by these technologies.
Fantastic. Mr. Rosselló, thank you so much for an educational and informative presentation. We're right at the end of our program. Dr. Duradbach, I'm going to hand it back to you if you have any last questions.
Thank you, Jessica. There is many other questions that I received, but one of them was, what is your opinion of the city of the future that Jacques Fresco modeled? Are you aware of it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
the city of the future that was modeled by Jacques Fresco. Are you?
I'm not familiar with that concept of that model.
Well, okay, well, you were familiar with many other things. It was a very interesting presentation, and I know that all of the people that listened to it learned a great deal from it. So thank you very much for being with us. And I just would like to say that next week, our discussant is Dr. William Rum from New York University, who spoke previously about COVID, and he will be discussing the current developments now. So have a very good week, and thank you very much. Thank you, Jessica, for
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.